Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the joint Saskatoon launch of I Feel That Way Too by Jes Battis and I Hate Parties by Jes Battis, both published by Nightwood Editions. Thank you so much to Jes and Jes for being here tonight, and also to Fernanda Viveros at Nightwood Editions for working with us to create this event and make this happen. Please note that this event is being live streamed, so there's a web camera just up to your right here. We will not be recording the audience. However, if your phone goes off during the event, the camera will pick it up and that embarrassment will live on the internet forever. So please silence or turn off your phones. If you would like to buy copies of either book, we hope you do. We have some up on the signing table here, as well as on the desk by where you came in. And you're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. Just please remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. We'd really appreciate that. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to our two poets this evening. Jes Papadopoulos is an interdisciplinary writer, educator, and video artist. They hold an MFA from UBC and are a Lambda Literary Fellow. A self-described emotionalist and avid Anne Carson fan, Jes is interested in media, horticulture, lyricism, nervous systems, anarchism, and erotics, which is an amazing combination of interests, I have to say. Originally from Treaty 1 territory, Jes currently resides on unceded Syilx lands. I Feel That Way Too is their debut poetry collection. Jes Battis teaches literature and creative writing at the University of Regina. They've published poems in the Ex-Puritan, the Malahat Review, the Capilano Review, and Poetry is Dead, among other literary magazines. They've also published creative nonfiction in the Los Angeles Review of Books and Strange Horizons. They're the author of the Occult Special Investigator series, which was shortlisted for the Sunburst Award, the Parallel Parks series, and most recently, The Winter Night with ECW, which we also have some copies of on the desk by where you came in. So I don't know which order you two are planning on speaking tonight. Jes? Okay, then everyone please welcome Jes.
Impressive that you've all come out on a Friday at 7. This is where the real party's happening, though. You know, this is the party alcove, not just the travel alcove. I want to draw everyone's attention to the cover of I Hate Parties. This is my partner Devin's cat, whose name is Bud. She is a cover model. I would say that she's gotten a pretty big head after becoming a star on this cover, so she doesn't really listen to us anymore. So I don't actually hate parties. I've done several interviews for this book, and the first question is always, Jes Battis, why do you hate parties? I don't actually hate them. I think they're complicated and weird. When I was younger, I used to have a real hard time with parties because I was like, how do I be human in this situation? Who do I talk to? How do parties work? And now I feel like I can fake it most of the time. But I sort of thought of this collection as a series of weird little parties. And I was also, I thought a lot about the Prince song 1999, in which he sings, life is just a party and parties aren't meant to last. The idea of living your life as a party, I found really interesting.
You took your phone off. It's like,
what's that?
I thought you were gonna play it.
No, I'm just checking. I'm just checking
I was like, whoa.
the time. Wouldn't that be great? And if Prince's estate sued us and it destroyed my literary career
And our event career.
We ended McNally Robertson.
I was being serious. I did think you were doing it.
Well, maybe we can all hold our phones up or something at some point, like lighters, as if we're at a really cool concert. I'm gonna start by reading a poem about figure skating. It's called Triple Axel. I pretend to be ill so I can watch figure skating at Lillehammer. It's 1994, and my mom and I are united in our hatred of Elvis Stoico, whose quads feel empty, like a bear bluff charging. I have to interrupt and say Elvis Stoico is a delightful person. I had a grudge against him when I was 14. We watched Grinkov and Gordieva and Seafoam Velvet. She cleaves to him, weightless, a single cloud formation. When she skates alone for the first time after his heart attack, their daughter will pat her arm gently. Though I dream of Paul Wiley's evangelical ass in tights, I only have eyes for Brian Boitano, clearly electric in a pirate outfit, tearing through the long program until he falls on the triple axle, combo shattered, our gasps, the floral quilt tossed aside to peer closer at the screen. 6 years ago in Calgary, it was the Battle of the Bryans, with Orser and Boitano dance fighting. One Bryan in classic black, the other in blue sequins, two comets against the drab orange arena, Shakespearean rivalry of gays, those lines of beauty, still closeted, but couldn't I see it even then? This, the gayest thing to watch in Chilliwack at the time, both Bryans locked in combat. Galindo screaming for joy at the US Championship, voice of taller Cranston in our ears smooth as fresh ice. They all dance around me, skates winking fire, gold trim, epaulettes, death spiral, of AIDS before the cocktail. It spins us still, and we are snow under the blade. I come out a year before Orser glides to Neil Diamond, the story of my life. If I'd only waited, I might have ridden Ellen's wave. I'm always at the wrong party. Instead, it's Brian and Brian who push me out of the stands, those gods in blue fire, suspending their long Cold War to spin me once, again, and then hurl me through space. That's a poem about watching figure skating with my mom in the early 90s. Trying to find a nerdy poem. Oh, I've got another real 90s poem called Winter Skips. This is for all of you who remember Discmans. Do you remember Discmans? Do you remember the anti-skip technology that in no way worked?
Yeah.
We paid extra for it, but it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
It's called Winter Skips. We're listening to Winter by Tori Amos. Our Discman's burning our laps as the piano solo unbolts us. You pass me a note that's just the number of times you've heard it today, 21. We get caught staring at the Leonardo DiCaprio poster. We're only letting ourselves go fuzzy for a moment, skipping forward because we think that's the good part. You're typing with an Australian guy on IRC. Does anyone remember IRC? Stands for Internet Relay Chat. You smiled imperceptibly when he sends you files. I'm jealous of your internet package. My modem is a screaming brick with ideas of its own. We stage a scene from Sailor Moon where Tuxedo Mask is stalked tenderly by a gay alien. We use flour to dye our hair, making pancakes in the shower. Our manuscripts are crammed into sawtooth binders. You read me a death, a birth over the phone until I can't feel my cheek. We're unknown and furious in hidden classrooms, plotting while everyone fails to play Magic the Gathering. See, I found a nerdy poem. Or maybe just me, cards and boxes like organ slices, red, blue, black, the spell that always wins if you're cruel enough to cast it. And if you are a Magic the Gathering nerd, you can ask me later what the card is that I'm talking about. I'll see if you can guess it. In the end, the only move I make from the boy I love unspeakably is to destroy his coffee maker, flooding the kitchen, twisting in panic as he laughs, then hoses it off in the yard like a dog's empty cage. You're lucky, he says, that we love you. That really did happen. I used a friend's coffee maker and thought that it had a built-in filter. It did not. I don't know if you've ever done that, but what happens is that the coffee maker dies and explodes. And then your best friend's mother is furious. This poem is called It's Funny. It's a little bit of a longer poem, but don't worry, not too long. I used to say it's funny whenever I wanted to introduce an obscurity, an obsession, a cat fact, a geode, a ribbon of wild speculation, until an ex told me to stop because preserved fog bodies and imperial Roman hairstyles aren't technically hilarious, more like the winter licked stones that some penguins carry to show one another. Have you seen my wares? Your teenager wakes you at 4 a.m. to show you a boss battle. Minutes ago, they shouldered the penguin backpack full of plumes and canoptic jars, and the memory of a zoetrope spinning first shadow, then light, then again. Seconds ago, we were little meteors. We carried our own sweet paraphernalia. We drank from the hose. A dog coughed on our bare feet. We stole a piece of saltwater taffy, then returned it, our criminal career over before it began. After two rattlers, I admit, if you asked me to marry you, I'd probably say yes. I've managed to sunburn a single knee, and later I'll destroy your bathroom. It's funny, a boy once vowed revenge on me in the eighth grade. I'd ruined his life a few years earlier, surprising even myself. Like Barbie, I'm thinking more about death and what it means to die well and alone in a world on fire. I imagine a pyre on a lava flow. Nurses will sometimes make false hands out of water balloons, so we have some warmth to hold on to. I think of the restlessness that precedes death and what rumination might lead me from my pallet into the burning hallway. I try to see what I'm seeing, but maybe it's something that hasn't been invented yet, or something too old and fragile to explain. It's funny, I live with the dread of a white-tailed jackrabbit skittering across an open plain of hostilities. You know when you're writing a poem and it suddenly sees you? One sodium light reaching from far away, or perhaps closer than you realized. It gets longer and longer because it wants to keep living. And isn't that relatable? It's funny. We're at the campus gathering, and wind is blowing the president's speech away. I steal a gluten-free bun by accident, hiding it in my bag like a condom. Wasps are drawn to our wild hair, streaming out like dendrite branches. Your youngest chose the camp option described as sports plus sports. Your eldest is coding in a cool, dark place. It's funny, but I can see the world that they're building, backed by sly fact, how everything will bloom where it lies. That poem is dedicated to my friend Medri. So I could read a poem about days of our lives, or I could read a poem about Doctor. This poem is called The Repair Shop. It's named after a reality show, a British reality show, where people fix things in a delightful way. After my mother's heart attack, we watch a show where all manner of broken things receive care under a thatched roof. A twisted Dalek slurs as men whisper carefully over its pebbled body. It belonged to a boy with no friends who carried it up imagined ice floes, touching the little homicidal plungers for luck. When her heart was outside her body, hands fluttered over all that she was, coaxing music back to the atrial halls from the door where it had nearly fled. We all fail in drawers and dark basements, pins worn down, until someone gathers us, turns on the light, and goes to work. When she called me in the deep dale of night, on the way to surgery, did I taste the icing she once ate beneath graham crackers as a child? Did I feel the baton dance from her hand, fibrillating, frozen in the sky's antechamber, the static, her voice climbing up that same glacier under the Dalek's curious eye? I've never wished to be fixed, but wouldn't say no to the kiss of a delicate weld. For every lost key in the master's bowl, there is a startled lock. For first and final loves, a solvent. For regret, a clever tool. For the broken gnome, an understated new face. There's a trick to unbreak every heart, only learned by touching here and here and here. I'm going to read one more poem. There's a poem about hockey, but it's kind of horny. And I don't want to read it. There's one about a tribble from Star Trek. That seems nerdy. Okay. This poem is called The Tribble. It's based on real life events, including me actually holding a tribble. And the person who let me hold the tribble probably should have been fired for that, but let's not. I approach the panel. Your blazer makes my eyes wend. Are you there, Catullus? I need to borrow the spindles of fate. You lift the lid. The tribble is old, practically coming undone. I catch archive fever. Your dog tackles me like Hobbes when I open a door. I mean Hobbes from Calvin and Hobbes. You know, the tiger's always tackling him, not Hobbes the philosopher. Although the tiger is named after Hobbes the philosopher. Aren't you glad for these footnotes? How I control the fun. A scoop of wet food pacifies her. Beards tickle while she dreams under the Afghan. Winter licks the doorstop as Obama makes his entrance. We fall off the Chesterfield, tangled in a string of lights. My argument won't coalesce. I don't know what to say about winged ones guarding his funeral, those archons in the margins. We watch reruns of House, avoiding the garrulous lobby where battered hopefuls crisp in a cast iron pan. Shadows make trouble, desires abrade the duotang. The wharf is like Full Harbor in Vancouver, jeweled by gulls. Streetcars bump at salient angles. The lever sings. My geometry is weak, but our hands solve for why. At the airport, I declare a finger puppet, a mercy letter, snow-streaked clay, some of the dog's orange brass. Nothing I can't carry on. Thanks, everyone.
Hello. Thanks for going first, Jess. I went first last time and felt like my vibe was way somber and it was a bummer for me. But Jess got all the laughs. When I was getting ready for this tour, a friend of mine was like, Jazz, what's the shtick you're gonna do while you're on tour? Are you gonna like read while undressing and then redressing? And I was like, this book is about the Jian Ghomeshi trial. That is just so inappropriate. Absolutely not. But usually my work is comedic and horny, so it did make sense. But I feigned offense. You know me at all. Yeah, so this book is, I think, a verse novel. It's a book of poetry, but none of them have titles, and it's one narrative. And it's about what it was like to listen to the media coverage of the Jian Ghomeshi trial and what it was like to listen to it in the context of being in university and being in survivor community. And it's kind of funny to think about now because then either I was young, I was younger, or it was the first time there was a big trial like that. But now there's been like the whole Me Too movement. Like it's just like every 2 years there's another big celebrity trial like this. But yeah, this was the first one in my life. Anyways. If you continue to ask yourself, did he intend it? The question is not that. If you wonder, does he know his own strength? The question is not that. When police encourage past victims to come forward, the answer is not that. Do not accuse a celebrity. The public eye is trained against you. Do not appear to be on a team. Do not express anger or animus or desire to sink the prick, collude, speak to other survivors. Do not do media interviews. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not send emails to the other complainants. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not send any emails at all. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Your confessions to the police can and will be used against you in a court of law. Your reluctance, eagerness, embarrassment can and will be used against you in a court of law. Whatever you state in a court of law can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not become a heroine for the cause. All defendants face the crown, which represents community, not victim interests. So consider your defendant's community and recall which community's interests the crown has represented in the past. Do not lie. Do not misrepresent. Do not offer new memory or precision or express uncertainty at what happened a mere 10 years ago. Do not be wrong. It's very simple. Do not exhibit willingness to withhold relevancies. Do not admit inconsistencies. Do not process the incident, inevitably causing yourself to change your perception of it over a period of time, up to and including 10 years. Do not misdescribe the current question. Do not thank him after the fact. Do not send him flowers, flirtatious texts, any texts, and certainly do not text, haha. Do not accompany him to a karaoke stage and do not sing Hit Me Baby One More Time. Haha. Do not engage after the fact. Do not erroneously believe that you understand common sense. It has no precise definition, but is well understood. On the one hand, it's really quite simple. Tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing. History of Media, Lesson 6, Practical Integration. Bivalves build their shells by gathering minerals from the surrounding seawater in a process known as biomineralization. As the oceans continue to acidify, less and less calcium carbonate is available for them to self-regulate through this process. Nitrogen from salmon is known to turn up in rings of nearby trees. So fewer salmon means smaller trees, not to mention hungry bears. We are inevitably and undeniably made by our environment. Case study. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? This was the first film to blend cartoon animation with live action. For Bob Hoskins, the actor who played Eddie Valiant, a hard-boiled PI with prejudice against so-called toons, seeking justice for the death of his brother. For Bob Hoskins, this meant interacting with imagined co-actors, both on set and off. Essentially, he convinced himself that he was surrounded by imaginary friends. And the story became real. After filming, Bob Hoskins suffered hallucinations for months, reportedly continuing to see and hear the film's characters around him. Despite Hoskins having known the characters were fiction, they did not stay fiction to him. Stuart Hall, a theorist, describes the mass communication cycle in the following stages: discursive production, the production of ideas; material production, production of a film; circulation, consumption, and then reproduction, culminating in what he calls consumptive integration. For Hoskins, the film's reality oozed beyond the boundaries of the screen. The cartoon characters were integrated into his life. He lived in a delusion. The mass communication cycle was complete. During the trial, the air was so cluttered, my lungs shrunk to need less, pulsing in shallow jerks. Cool shocks of air light inner nostril, amnesia front of mind. In bed, lungs up, I wait for heaven to stop. Let the glasses be drunk or let them pour. I live between dying stars and their light, sighted across the unfolding paper plane sky. Evening radio released Mr. from guilt. The sea suffered, source says. Dear pigeons, do you think I don't notice all the signs? Lipstick, blush, the cherry of your cigarette, red, like stop the pipeline, stop hammer time, stop Harper, Trudeau, the government. What burns, what falls, what blabs, what stains, what bruises? What did the newspapers say about all those women crumpled between the street and the splash? There is a bedroom, there is a bed, there is rest for the wicked and a black hole for me. Too many windows, too many frames, and 1,000 of you lining the street. You coo, you calm, you reach. To ash your cigarette, to suit up your smile, to step off the roof, to float, to flee. What gravity, what history, what power, what me. Real, but not true. That's what Tara always says, but still things stick, and I can't drop it. Do you remember Jessica Rabbit? When she sang, her breasts floated and my mouth filled with strawberries and cream. Papers document the negative impact of media on girls' self-esteem, takes on life of its own. Jessica's live-action co-star Bob went mad post-production. Poor Bob. He couldn't stop seeing cartoons everywhere. Do you remember that scene from Lord of the Flies, when a gasping, squealing pig is overpowered by heavy-breathed boys, when they press pelts to dirt and play butcher? When we studied that book in English class, my feminist teacher, the one with the backyard chickens, said, "The theme is rather sexual, isn't it?" Do you ever feel like violence and desire are so closely intertwined you don't know what you want? The memory of an experience produces the same, real, but not true. When I open to you with the wordless nothing, all I hope you'll say back is, I feel that way too. The last one. The rains have started, and the dog won't stop smelling everything. Leaves red the gray, and ghost print the walk, material memory melting in the wet. We slow for winter, with 14-hour nights, petrichor, black coffee, weather and weed. We ask Tara what to do about our jaws. They won't stop clenching. She says, imagine a strip of leather laid like a tongue across the horizon of your mouth. Feel it firm, sturdy and smoky. Bite down. Feel it give a little like a pillow in the hinge of your jaw. Our mouths fill with petals, and we remember the feeling of unfurling in the spring. My love opens her head, mouthing like a baby bird, and asks me for it. I open up, drip spit, Pendulum begging overlit. Will it all be okay? It nods. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
You want to start with questions, or do you want to start with just chatting? Up to you. Okay. Yeah, let's do a little chatting.
Hello.
What's the worst question I could ask? Who are you, Jes?
That is a horrible thing to do to me.
I've been asked a lot of weird questions during events, but I'm not gonna go over any of them because they're too strange. Sometimes I think people think that authors have like extremely interesting lives, but like we don't. We're like this is already past my bedtime.
Like, what was going on for you in your life while you were writing that book?
Hmm. Well, um, a lot of these poems coalesced during this period where I was like between novels, and I had worked with a publisher for a very long time. And then a series that I wrote for them kind of did not perform all that well, and so they didn't renew that contract. And then I was between contracts for several years and sort of feeling like I wasn't a writer because I wasn't producing fiction. I was doing other things, but I wasn't writing novels. And so I think I started to write more poems because I couldn't quite get into the groove of writing another novel, but a poem was kind of doable. I could finish it and feel like something. And then some of the poems in this collection started to coalesce. Um, and I realized that a lot of my poems are about anxiety. I'm a very calm person. Don't worry. Oh, geez. Let's see. They didn't laugh at that. Isn't that interesting? Poets are very normal. I listened to a lot of um, the Taylor Swift album Midnights while I was working on this. Um, I found that album really interesting to listen to, and it's a good album for writing. Can you listen to like, do you have to listen to um, like instrumental music when you're writing?
No, I listened to the same James Blake album on
Oh yeah.
repeat. Yeah.
Sometimes I would listen to Kim Petras, but then she would get like a little bit too um, animated for, and then I would need to sort of go calm down for a little bit. Um, I find like I'm not sure what your practice is for poetry, but usually I write a poem kind of all at once, and then I fiddle with it for like 5 years. It's kind of like it's not very efficient, but that's generally how it works. Like the a central image appears, I write around that image, and then I have to keep chipping away at it to figure out what it's really about because sometimes I'm fooling myself.
Yeah, I think I don't know what my process is anymore. I'm out of grad school and I'm like not in any kind of regular artist community, which was always how I structured myself before. But I think the process is something like uh, basically free write journaling forever. And then when there's a reason for an event or a thesis deadline, um, then I'm like, okay, what is in all of these hundreds of pages that are strewn about my desk? And I sometimes literally just cut them up and tape them back together and stuff like that. But I am the person who like I drew a labyrinth on the spare bedroom wall and then taped every page of my book in the labyrinth because I thought it would like help me figure out what order the pages should go in. Yeah,
That's amazing.
from the prairies.
Yeah, yeah, space. I'm in a poetry group with a local poet named Taker Beza, who's a graduate of the MFA program at USAS. And I was talking about being stuck on a poem, and she was like, "Have you tried writing it backwards?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she was like, "Just start with the last line, get to the first, and see what that looks like in the end." And I thought that was quite brilliant. I'm not usually stuck in terms of poetry. Like I get stuck more with fiction. With poetry, I can usually produce something. It just might be like hot garbage that is actually produced. But um, I keep thinking about there's a TikTok. I think I mentioned this at the Regina launch too by the um, BC poet Michael B. Smith. They have a posted a video on TikTok where they read a poem called in response to the university administrator who said that my faculty is the least profitable on campus. And they talk about how writing poetry, like it's helps students process shit and trauma. So sometimes I think like the poem doesn't have to be great. Sometimes it's just like something that needs to get written. I know that when I was close to finishing grad school, it sort of felt like the bottom dropped out of my life because I realized that very soon that structure that I'd had for many years would be gone. And then I would just have to like be a human in the world and I wouldn't go to classes anymore. And that was actually really hard. Like I was quite depressed after I finished, and my dissertation was on like depressed gay wizards. That's sort of what it was about to begin with. So it was about melancholia, but it's about gay wizards. Um, so it's interesting to kind of hear you talk about that structure. I wonder like if a poem can be soothing in its structure as well. I sometimes find if I can't write fiction, there's something about being in a poem that I find kind of soothing.
I don't think I relate to that.
No, it's always tense.
Your productivity to be very admirable.
Oh man, I've actually slowed down. For a while, I was writing, and I was working with this other publisher. They wanted me to write a book every year, and that included all the editing. And it was unsustainable with a full-time teaching job. And I remember talking to my agent about it, and she was kind of like, "Well, this is the job if you want to write in this particular genre with this particular publisher. So you might have to rethink things." I think I thought she was going to be like, "No, babe, you can do it." Or she was going to be like, "They're terrible." But she was just like, "This is actually just how it works with this, if you're writing in this kind of very particular space." And so it made me realize that I didn't want to do that anymore. It was actually quite useful. Uh, I can't imagine like, are there poets that write like a book of poems a year? That sounds terrible.
No, no. My first residency, my goal was to write one poem a month.
Yeah.
And the people running the residency were like, "That's a lot. You should pare it back."
I was surprised when my mother read this book of poems, and she's my sort of biggest cheerleader. She still tells me that, honey, you should definitely try to publish the work that you wrote when you were 14. And I say, well, no, nobody, like only Jane Austen did that. Like she wouldn't have wanted it to be published. But after she read this book of poems, she said, "I didn't realize that your childhood was so difficult." And I said, I didn't really think the poems are, I didn't really think there was that sense of difficulty. I think everyone's childhood is weird, certainly. She was also concerned that I did a lot of drugs in the 90s. And I mean, like, I will neither confirm nor deny that happened. Has anyone in your family had interesting reactions to your work?
My mother has not spoken to me since taking home a copy of this book.
It's awkward.
So I think she's full of anger.
Processing.
Yeah. I think we should open it up.
Yeah. I was gonna say that my dad is still speaking to me, but I think he's mad that there wasn't a poem specifically about him. He's like, I noticed there's two poems about your mother, and I was like, well, there's three actually.
Parents are so complicated. Does anyone in the audience have either in person or online have questions?
Hi. I always like to ask, how do you know when you're done something?
How do we know? For with a poem, I guess for me, when I read it aloud, there's a certain sense of closure to it, maybe. The sort of part of my brain that's itching to tweak it will have kind of calmed down to an extent. But it's never gone completely. Like there were poems in this collection where I still want to edit them. But in general, it's more of a, and like this sounds very like woo-woo, but it's like more of a feeling. Just that I'm not itching as much to tweak it. And with fiction, it's sort of like when my editor tells me it's done, they're like, you're done. Like, okay.
For me, it's when the deadline has arrived, it is finished. And I don't know if I've ever finished something without having an externally imposed deadline, but then also sometimes I get like, they give you an extra week at the end. Yes. And then it's when I've gotten to a point when all of the craft feels super tight. And I'm just like, you know, when you like eat something and it's good, you're like, mm.
Okay, yeah, we have a
Online question.
multi-part online question here.
This has got to be from an academic. It's for me to type it.
Oh.
Ready.
Okay, so this is a question for Jess.
Yes.
Yeah. Why do you think women are scrutinized for the same match if it's the same violence? So pro wrestling. So,
Yes.
yes. Why do you think women are scrutinized for the same sort of match and the same sort of violence in pro wrestling as opposed to men?
I don't think I understand the question.
Yeah.
Like they have like a no.
The question's about wrestling.
Yeah, but it's like women when they have the same kind of physical match, like violent as men, but the women get scrutinized for doing the same kind of match.
Oh, like in pro wrestling?
Yeah.
Is there poetry about wrestling in your book?
No, but I mean, I guess the answer is sexist. Like, I think just people that are femme presenting or women are always going to be scrutinized when they leave the house or are in public. I like, I do find wrestling fascinating. Like, I grew up in the late 80s, and so, um, you know, I watched the WWF cartoon and I had those little wrestlers that fit over your thumbs and you wrestled with them. And I found it interesting. Like I my partner and I were watching Project Runway and we learned the term peacocking. It's like when men are just kind of really into kind of display. And I found wrestling fascinating that way because there were guys that were kind of like wearing, you know, like sequins and they were being very dramatic, but because I think it was in the context of violence, it was okay. So it's definitely like it's an interesting kind of performance culture. And as a weird anecdote, my great grandmother was extremely into wrestling. And my mother would always say to her, you know, it's fake, right? And she was like, that's not the point. But she'd never said what the point was. So that's my answer.
Okay, I've never watched Project Runway, but I'm pretty sure the term peacocking comes out of pickup artist literature.
Cool.
Like the book The Game.
All right.
Yeah, it's a book that's like how to gamify picking up women.
Oh, okay.
And do you wear a ridiculous outfit so that someone will strike up a conversation with you?
Like that bird.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's all. Fun fact.
Did Project Runway steal from pickup artists, or did pickup artists steal from Project Runway? Do we have any other questions?
Another wrestling question, and then I have a non-wrestling question. Do you think it'll ever be socially acceptable again to have intergender wrestling matches? Because I'll give you a little background. The Me Too movement had happened, and then it was a speaking out movement for wrestling, and then it wasn't socially acceptable. But before that happened, it was like pretty happening on the like independent wrestling scene.
I don't think I have the expertise to answer that question, but it is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think I do think that in terms of like interpersonal disputes, we should bring back um like dueling, like but the type of 18th century dueling where like neither person really knows how to do it because they're aristocrats and so they just sort of pretend to shoot the other person. That's my answer. Do you want to take this question or okay, what's the non-wrestling question?
One thing that really upsets me in the sports world is like when a woman interviewer goes in when they're changing and she gets like just bashed for doing that, while a male can like do that in a women's one. But like I just want to hear your points of views on about that and if it will change in the future.
Is that about poetry?
Write a poem about gender in sports.
We can talk about gender.
I was just wondering when you folks get to it, feel free to think about this other question too, but I'm always curious if these are the books that you pitched to your publishers. I'm always wondering if they change along the way. Like, is this what you thought you would produce, or have you ended up with something wonderful and different?
Do you want to answer?
This is a different book than what I pitched. It's just much longer because I sent in something that was only like 60 pages and they were like, you need to make it longer. um, and basically what I had pitched is the third section or chapter of the book, like the long section. But when I was trying to figure out how to add pages, I was just getting really stuck and I hated everything that I was writing. And then it was down to like the last 2 weeks. And I was on a huge Anne Carson kick. And she just kind of has like a couple of different small books in her book. So that's what I did. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write a couple introductory chapters that teach you how to read the long poem. And I think it's way better now.
That's a really interesting question. I think like my experience with fiction is that that type of manuscript tends to change quite a bit from submission to publication. Poetry, I think, is maybe a little bit more ambivalent. In the case of this book, because it was my first book of poetry, I kind of just handed a massive folder of poems in and it was like poems. And I thought some of them went together and I sort of organized them as much as I could. But the editor that I worked with was pretty exacting and really kind of drilled down and matched poems in ways that I wouldn't have expected. Um, and he said something to me that I hadn't ever thought about before. The poem that I read about figure skating that the book starts with, I didn't want to include that poem in the book. I didn't like it. I thought it was kind of too rough. And the editor said, no, I definitely want to include it. Um, and I think it should be the first one. And I argued about this a bit because I thought the poem that follows it was stronger. And the editor said, there's nothing wrong with following a good poem with an even better poem because the last thing that you want is to start out so strong and then have a poem that kind of is a little bit not as energetic. And I had never thought about that before. So certainly the book is a lot leaner, um, but I don't know that I could have arrived at this collection, this particular configuration on my own. I think it definitely needed another set of eyes.
Do we have other audience questions?
I was gonna ask, you'd mentioned like, hey, there's another trial like this every 2 years now, and it's exhausting. How do you react to this? Like, is it like, hey, we're finding more garbage, great, let's get the guys making the garbage? Or do you look at it and go like, the pile of garbage is never ending and it's never gonna go away? Like, that's kind of how I feel about it sometimes. Like, it's almost like, oh, they caught another one, great, when will it end? Like, how do you react to it when you hear like, P. Diddy's in the news, right?
Yeah. So I have kind of two, it's like a split of thought that comes up with that. And the first one is just to say that I don't really engage with any of the media around those trials anymore. Occasionally I'll listen to like, a podcast episode of like people that I trust. But generally I think that the way media coverage happens is just a misery. And I guess this leads into my second prong of thought, which is just like all media is horrible. Um, I studied conflict resolution, which took me into like critical theory, which took me into art. But somewhere in there, I got really into reading Edward Said, who's a Palestinian theorist who literally wrote the book on Orientalism and has another one called Culture and Imperialism. And I think that really just sums it up, that mass media tells us the worlds that the dominant powers want to reinforce. And it's really, really painful for so many of us that don't fit into like elite identity or elite wealth status. So I don't know that I think that like violence is worse. And like statistically speaking, I think that violence is actually a lot less of a daily risk for most of us compared to a couple hundred years ago and then like back throughout tens and hundreds of thousands of years of human history. But the way media bombards us with the reinforcement of structures of oppression is really, really prominent and brutal.
We have time for one last question here if anyone else would like to tune in.
What are you working on next?
I like your response, just like nervous laughter. I'm not working on poems. I feel like I'm a little burnt out on writing poetry. Although I have ideas for another collection eventually that would sort of focus on television. And I was really inspired by reading Dina Del Bucchia's most recent um, book of poems, which focuses a lot on kind of reading television through chronic illness. So eventually, I'd like to do something television based. Right now, I'm working on. Oh, I can't say that because the contract's not signed. Okay, what can I? Another manuscript that I'm working on is uh it's a fantasy novel that's set in Moose Jaw, that involves sort of Scottish mythology and lots of kelpies and selkies and it's sort of I'm trying to get at kind of my family's Scottish roots on my grandmother's side and wondering what it's like or trying to think about what it's like when you kind of move a mythology from Europe to the prairies and how that ends up. And it's also about like a struggling um, a character who graduates from an MFA program and just like has no employment. So well, the main character gets a writer in residence position in Moose Jaw, but then doesn't really understand how much work that's going to be, and then starts getting haunted by water horses. So that's what that book's about. What about you? Are you working on anything?
Kind of, always, never. Um, so I've started a garlic farm. I left Vancouver and have started a garlic farm, a gay garlic farm. And I've been pitching to Canada Council to like write a sex work and farming book for years. They just won't take it. So talk to your friends at Canada Council. Um, if I could get a job in a TV writer's room, I would be so happy. But I think my goal for the winter is to start learning how to make textile art because it's so beautiful and nice to touch.
Okay, that's an excellent question to end on. Thank you so much to Jess and Jazz for joining us tonight. Thank you all for being here. And if you would like a signed copy of poetry, both Jess and Jazz will be up here. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. I think we got there.
Pardon me? Yeah.